is Mr. Hergott.
Chairman Whitehouse and Ranking Member Grassley, my name is Alex Hergott, and I'm president of the Permitting Institute and the former and first appointed executive director of the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council. TPI is a federal and state-focused, nonpartisan nonprofit serving as an authoritative voice on permitting and a trusted expert resource and education partner for federal and state policymakers and regulators. Our diverse membership collectively support a common goal of accelerating infrastructure across all sectors. TPI members and staff speak from experience that comes from writing the laws in Congress, then developing projects, financing them, permitting them, citing them, and interacting with the government officials for implementing the myriad of laws, regulations, and guidelines that determine where, how, and when a project gets built. The reality is that every project that turns dirt, regardless of the sector that you care about, encounters habitat, alters landscape, creates unavoidable interactions with nature, triggering hundreds of reviews and regulations that govern infrastructure permits at the federal, state, and local level. As the chairman knows all too well, as you can see from the chart, is that infrastructure permitting is carried out by 13 agencies operating under the authority of dozens of statutes, some of which are more than 100 years old. The result is a permitting process mired with excessive delays and litigation risk that stifles investment. Now, the Energy Act of 2020, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, CHIPS, IRA, they provided unprecedented funding for our nation's critical infrastructure. However, the omission of significant permitting reforms in this legislation is undermining one of the largest single federal investments in infrastructure since the Depression. While Congress has agreed on modest process reforms to achieve greater coordination and efficiency, these surface-level process changes have only served as Band-Aids and are not the necessary surgical cure. To be clear, interagency coordination and transparency, dashboards, executive orders, White House permitting action plans, and a strengthened federal permitting improvement steering council are very much needed. However, they are not the sufficient step to reduce the hundreds of billions of dollars in costs associated with infrastructure permitting across all sectors. Even with the subset of reforms in the Fiscal Responsibility Act just recently in the debt limit bill, which represent the most significant legislative changes to NEPA in 40 years, in practice, developers will still experience most of the same obstacles and avoidable process delays that have plagued this system for decades. Truly impactful legislation will have to move beyond macro-level NEPA changes and untangle the web of confusion and uncertainty in this chart. The challenges and costs inflicted by our broken permitting system do not discriminate by sector. Whether it was the extra 3 years on the Mid-Barrier Coastal Restoration Project, or as the chairman knows all too well, with offshore wind, in the last 2 years, the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council Executive Director has received and approved more than 17 requests from lead permitting agencies to extend the completion date for at least 10 offshore wind projects on the dashboard, creating an additional 10 years that was not anticipated at the beginning of the permitting timetable. This is not unique to offshore wind. It's for traditional fossil fuel, broadband, water, you name it. The problem is getting worse, not better, at a time when we can least afford it. No one wins under the current system, not the companies on the front lines of transitioning the U.S. harnessing technology for greener energy generation and storage, not the environment, and not the majority of Americans that will bear the brunt of these increased energy and environmental costs. On average, project developers reported that 20 to 30% of total project costs is wasted on delays. All these costs are ultimately passed on to citizens, either through taxes, tolls, or increased rates and usage fees. It's not all bad news. We've seen glimpses of what sound reform can do, and there's an opportunity for lawmakers to build and expand on the reforms enacted over the last decade. But in order to do that, the process must be transparent. At present, outside of the Federal Permitting Council, some small issues at DOE and FERC, and the DOT projects tracked under one federal decision under the IIJA, there is no central repository and real-time tracking and the inventory and status of projects navigating their way through the federal agencies. The lack of process transparency allows for gamesmanship of 2-year timelines, and the lack of publicly available data prevents stakeholder engagement and our ability to accurately diagnose the problem. We don't need to hide the problems. This is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. It is a process issue we can fix. The beauty of transparency is that the facts now drive this debate, not hyperbole and posturing. The reality is that the last significant study of NEPA timelines was completed by the Council of Environmental Quality more than 5 years ago. Where's that study? While it can be convenient to blame faceless bureaucrats for delays and process problems. As someone who worked alongside the hardworking pioneers of the FIPSI dashboard and the thousands of dedicated project managers across the interagency process, I encourage Congress to refrain from such rhetoric. Instead, I challenge you to help me and others make public service the desired pathway by recognizing the talents required and the contributions of these agency professionals that make towards advancing America's infrastructure goals. TPI believes the majority of Republicans and Democrats in Congress favor a faster, more transparent, predictable, and accountable permitting process. But we first must collectively acknowledge that the modernization of what have often been called bedrock environmental laws will absolutely be required. Despite bipartisan agreement that the country's permitting process is broken, skepticism over the motivations behind the new legislative reform proposals and the outside stakeholders, each prioritizing their narrow interests, and the fear of what a negotiated compromise may look like at the end of a conference or of a bill, it has inhibited additional reforms. However, I remain cautiously optimistic that reform is achievable. From our vantage point at TPI, we see staff from both sides of the aisle and from all sectors coming to us with the same challenge with their own version of a proposed solution. By providing technical assistance and connecting members and stakeholders with that shared interest, we at TPI are working to help build a bridge required for comprehensive reform that eliminates obstacles for all Americans' infrastructure development, not just the one that you care about. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hergott, and congratulations on a truly heroic effort to pack the maximum number of words into your 5-minute window. That was impressively done. And also thank you for your reference to offshore wind, which will take me to Governor Bell Edwards. First of all, thank you for your positive mention and for your support for the RISE Act. This will provide revenues to coastal states like yours. It will expand offshore wind, particularly in the Gulf. It will add the construction and manufacturing jobs associated with offshore wind and provide an economic hedge for the Gulf states against carbon bubble risk to state and local revenue. So I'm really grateful for your support. Tell me a little bit about what is happening along the Louisiana coast right now. What are you looking at?
With respect to wind or more broadly?
With respect to coastal
Yes, sir.
risk, coastal harms.
Well, you know, we are particularly challenged in Louisiana and have been for a long time. We've lost 2,000 square miles of land since 1930. Inaction going forward with sea level rise alone, we would lose another 3,000 square miles over the next 50 years. Of course, inaction is not,
Grand total 5,000 square
yes,
miles.
Sir. But inaction's not an option, and in fact, that's not what we're doing. We have the country's most robust plan for coastal restoration and protection. We are investing mightily for a state our size. When in 2007, when we came up with a plan that said $50 billion over 50 years, there was nothing magical about it. We just couldn't imagine we would ever have more than $1 billion a year. And we said, okay, what would we do? We are actually on track. Last year, we spent $1.3 billion in our coast. This year will be $1.6 billion. And critically important is the RISE Act, because we constitutionally dedicate all of our federal offshore revenue for oil and gas production to our coast. But we, unlike interior states, we're limited to 37.5%, not 50%, capped at $375 million, and then it's shared among 4 states. So the RISE Act would address that, but more importantly for us, or at least significantly it would be, create a revenue sharing around wind, which would be critically important for Louisiana because we are going to develop wind. There's a lease sale going to happen next month off the coast of Louisiana by BOEM, but also we have 5 companies that are interested in state water wind development as well. So that's critically important. And Mr. Chairman, one of the things we have to start planning for is in 2031, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill damages that are funding the Mid-Barataria sediment diversion, for example, at almost $3 billion. Those funds go away. We really want to replace that to the extent that we can, at least, with wind energy revenue. So we've got a lot going on our coast, and like other states, you know, we've got 40% of our people live in South Louisiana now, and it's such a huge part of our economy. It's a special place for the country, not just for Louisiana, and we have a real sense of urgency about what we're doing, and I know you've been down there to see it, and I invite all the committee members to come and see what we're doing in Louisiana. I'm proud of our efforts, and I've traveled to the Netherlands and other places. What we're doing in Louisiana, it is on scale with anything happening anywhere in the world right now.
The infrastructure costs that you're bearing to adapt to and protect against climate change and sea level rise, I assume that the federal government is a partner in that, and some of those costs revert back to the federal government. What is the scale of the state and federal investment that you look forward to?
Well, first of all, the federal government has been a tremendous partner. If you just go back to Hurricane Katrina, with the failure of the federal levees around New Orleans, which really caused the enormous death and damage, there's been $14.5 billion of investment. Now, we have our share of that, and we're certainly meeting that. But that was borne by and large through the generosity of people all over the country, hugely important. The Corps of Engineers is engaged in 10 projects all over the state of Louisiana, primarily in the south, along the coast and along the river there, that will have tremendous impact. So yes, there's tremendous investment, but it is literally in the billions of dollars. These are not small investments. But one of the things that I'd like to point out, they are paying off. Hurricane Ida hit southeast Louisiana in 2021. It was stronger than Hurricane Katrina, and a very similar trajectory when it hit the state. Very little damage compared to Hurricane Katrina, and so those were cost saved. And I'm sitting here not just because of what's happened since I've been governor, but I firmly believe that these storm events are going to be more frequent and they're going to be more severe, and therefore the cost savings will be more frequent and they will be greater over time. Another example of this is a federal Corps authorized protection project in Morganza to the Gulf. Hurricane Rita in 2005, 9-foot storm surge in this area inundated 11,000 structures. The work that we did, Hurricane Barry, same area, 9-foot of storm surge, 11 structures. 11,000 versus 11. It costs a lot, but the savings accrue for a very long time. Now, we're having challenge getting FEMA to recognize all that work and have it reflected in the risk rating 2.0 premiums for the National Flood Insurance Program. That's another thing, but we know that these investments pay off over time and they produce savings, and it's so good for the economy and otherwise.
So big investments can be wise investments. My time has expired. Let me yield to Senator Grassley. I will have some questions for the record for the other witnesses, and there is time to turn around those answers, so please be ready for those questions for the record when they come in, and please respond timely.